The rain outside was a cold, brutal percussion against the window pane. Inside, the neon sign of the Sunrise Diner buzzed with a low, melancholic hum, casting the room in a tired, buttery yellow glow. It was an atmosphere Leonard Drake despised, common, worn, and far too honest. He sat at a chipped formica table, his tailored wool coat feeling like armor in this humble sanctuary. At 53, Leonard was a titan. He was the force behind Drake Investments, a man whose decisions shaped markets and whose name was a byword for ruthless success. He controlled millions, yet in this moment, trapped by a flash thunderstorm and a driver's wrong turn, he felt a flicker of the one thing he always denied: boredom. He was a man who thrived on power, and one of his favorite little pastimes was to momentarily disarm those who served him. A subtle, calculated joke to remind them of the chasm between their world and his. The waitress who approached him was a quiet contrast to the storm. Maya, 26 years old, with eyes that held a depth far beyond her years, and a smile that seemed less like a greeting and more like a gentle, practiced defense against the world's exhaustion. She placed a mug of lukewarm coffee in front of him, the clatter of the saucer echoing Leonard's own internal tension. "Long night?" she asked, her voice soft, almost musical, cutting through the silence of his self-absorption. Leonard leaned back, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips. She had no idea who he was. The irony was too perfect. This, he decided, would be his little amusement for the night. "You could say that," he replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble accustomed to commanding attention. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, watching her patiently wait. "Tell me, since you're the expert around here." He gestured vaguely at the room. The mismatched chairs, the flickering light, the worn vinyl seats. A silent, demeaning judgment of her domain. He brought his hands together, resting them on the table, showcasing the faint gleam of his multi-million-dollar gold watch. "What financial advice," he asked, dragging out the words with theatrical condescension, "would you give a man like me?" The question was not a request for wisdom, it was a performance. He expected a flutter of panic, a shy giggle, a clumsy compliment about his obvious wealth. He anticipated the predictable deference he received everywhere else. He was ready to smile dismissively, drop a ridiculously large tip, and tell himself he had been generous with his time. But Maya didn't flinch. Her eyes, which moments before had been soft and tired, suddenly sharpened. She didn't look at his coat, his watch, or his posture. She looked into him, at the tense set of his jaw, the impatient tapping of his fingers, the cold, hollow certainty in his gaze. The diner felt momentarily suspended, the only sound the distant, rhythmic hammering of the rain. And then she spoke. Her first words were not a stammer, not a blush, and certainly not a compliment. They were a cool, calm statement that shattered Leonard's carefully constructed bubble of superiority. "The first piece of advice I would give you, sir," she began, her voice steady as an anchor, "has nothing to do with money." Leonard's smirk evaporated. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the diner's temperature. She continued, her gaze unwavering, holding him accountable. "The first piece of advice is, stop treating your wealth like a shield and start treating it like a responsibility." The statement hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of his charade. It wasn't the words themselves, but the absolute, undeniable truth in her tone. It was a punch he never saw coming, delivered by a woman who made minimum wage. Leonard felt a raw, defensive flush climb his neck. She had seen him, the real, arrogant, small man beneath the billion-dollar veneer. He was completely and utterly speechless. The self-proclaimed king of finance had just been judged and found wanting by a waitress in a roadside diner. What kind of person could look at a stranger and instantly diagnose a moral bankruptcy deeper than any financial one? We all search for connection, for someone to truly see us. Sometimes, the most important lessons are delivered in the most unlikely places, by the people we are trained to overlook. This story is about that moment, the collision of two vastly different worlds and the shocking truth a simple waitress unveiled. This journey is about realizing that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in compassion. If you want to follow Leonard and Maya's incredible journey and see how one simple act of honesty changed everything for them both, please take a moment to subscribe and let us know you're here. We worked so hard to bring you this story of finding the true meaning of value, and we hope it touches your heart as deeply as it did ours. Leonard Drake, the man who had everything, sat utterly frozen, the lukewarm coffee steaming between him and the astonishing waitress. His mind, usually a high-speed processor of market data and negotiation tactics, was blank. Responsibility. What did she know of his responsibilities? He ran an empire. But the truth was, her words had found the exact hollow center of his life. He had been using his wealth as a shield, a thick, impenetrable barrier against any genuine human connection. It was a tool to keep the world and any messy emotions at a comfortable, transactional distance. He had been challenged not on his portfolio, but on his soul. Leonard's story was one of relentless ascent, born from a poverty he swore he'd never revisit. As a child, he watched his father, a talented but financially naive engineer, lose everything to a poor investment and a predatory partner. The shame, the eviction notice, the look in his mother's eyes, it all forged in young Leonard a steel-hard conviction. Money was the only thing that mattered. It was safety, dignity, and power. He didn't just chase wealth. He sought to master it, to control the variables that had once crushed his family. He had succeeded astronomically, but somewhere along the line, the master had become the servant. His pursuit of control had controlled him. He hadn't loved anyone deeply since his mother passed away 10 years ago, leaving him alone in a mansion full of expensive, meaningless objects. Now let's turn to Maya. Her world was painted in the muted, stressful colors of perpetual worry. Maya lived in a small, two-bedroom apartment where the scent of cleaning supplies barely masked the faint odor of old building materials. Her life wasn't defined by a lack of dreams, but by the relentless effort required just to keep them from being crushed. Her dream, that fragile treasure she kept tucked away, was to become a certified financial planner. She devoured textbooks in the quiet hours after her double shift, highlighting passages on long-term security, debt consolidation, and generational wealth, not for personal gain, but for the fierce desire to help others. The reason for her exhaustion was her younger brother, Ethan. At 21, Ethan suffered from a rare, chronic autoimmune disorder that required expensive, specialized medication not fully covered by their limited insurance. He was brilliant, funny, and deeply apologetic about the burden he placed on his sister. "Go to class, Maya. I can manage the clinic trip this week," he'd plead, his voice thin from fatigue. "We're a team, Ev. We'll get through this," she'd always reply, forcing a brave smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. She worked 2 jobs, the Sunrise Diner from 4 p.m. to midnight and a coffee shop from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. Her days were a blur of steam, tips, customer smiles, and the constant, nagging anxiety of the medical bills piling up on her small kitchen counter. She was the family's anchor, sacrificing her education, her social life, and her peace of mind for the sake of Ethan's health. The irony of her situation was a constant, bitter weight. She spent her nights studying how to build wealth and security, yet her own life was balanced on the razor's edge of financial ruin. Just 2 months ago, she had to choose between paying the rent on time and buying a month's supply of Ethan's crucial medication. She chose the medication. The landlord had been furious, threatening eviction. That moment of raw fear, the possibility of her and Ethan being homeless, had etched a new, deeper layer of resolve into her soul. She needed a break, a miracle, or at least a single, high-paying client for her future practice. Her answer to Leonard had not been an act of disrespect. It was an accidental outpouring of her entire philosophy. She had seen a man drowning in his own excess, so disconnected from genuine human concern that he used his power to amuse himself at the expense of others. In his cold eyes, she saw the potential for the very kind of predatory indifference that had led her and Ethan to their own financial cliff. Her advice was not about the stock market. It was about the cost of a soulless life. It was about the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Leonard, still reeling, watched her turn away to tend to another table, a trucker requesting a refill, a woman asking for the check. He saw the genuine, easy compassion she offered, the way she didn't just serve, but saw people. He suddenly saw his own life reflected in the harsh mirror of her simple truth. He spent his time accumulating power, while she spent hers accumulating human value. He watched her wipe down the counter, her movements efficient and practiced, her tired hands telling a story of relentless labor. A sudden, deep pang of guilt hit him. He had sought to tease her, to demean her with his joke. He had expected a fearful response. Instead, she had offered him the most valuable advice he'd received in decades. He thought of his own children, grown, successful, but emotionally distant. They called him on his birthday, but never for advice or comfort. They called his secretary for an appointment. He remembered asking his son, David, for his opinion on a recent philanthropic venture he was considering. David had simply responded, "Is it tax-deductible, Dad? Focus on the ROI." The apple hadn't fallen far from the tree, and Leonard suddenly saw the bitter harvest of the life he had modeled. Maya returned, a small, hopeful flicker in her eyes. "Will that be all, sir?" Leonard hesitated, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. It wasn't anger, it was a profound, uncomfortable curiosity. "That advice about responsibility," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "It was unexpected." Maya offered a small, weary smile. "The greatest investments, sir, are usually the ones you don't see on a spreadsheet. We all have a responsibility, whether it's to the truth, to our families, or to the community that supports us. You have more to give than most. Use it for something that actually matters." She left him with his coffee and her words, both suddenly potent and difficult to swallow. The billionaire, the master of the financial universe, was completely unsettled. If you were in this situation, standing where Leonard Drake stood, a man with limitless resources, who had just been given a painful, profound piece of advice by someone clearly struggling, would you walk away and forget her words, or would you try to help? What does your heart tell you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Leonard didn't walk away. He couldn't. He watched Maya closely, observing her every interaction. The kind word to the tired trucker, the moment she discreetly paid for a child's juice box when their mother's card declined. He saw the small, constant acts of kindness she performed without effort, without even noticing. And he realized that he had stumbled into a place where true wealth, the wealth of the human spirit, was on full, agonizing display. He pulled out his phone, not to check the stock ticker, but to quickly search for financial planner certification study guides. He was going to find out more about the woman who had just diagnosed his life's emptiness. The thunderstorm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under the streetlights. Leonard Drake, however, felt distinctly unclean, rattled by the truth spoken by a waitress whose name he now knew, Maya. He didn't leave the diner immediately. He stayed, nursing a second cup of coffee and watching Maya work her second hour after her shift should have ended. He watched the way the diner owner, an older woman named Mrs. Alina, leaned heavily on her cane and winced when she bent over. Leonard had done a quick search on the diner's holding company during his uncomfortable contemplation. It was a single location, family-owned business barely breaking even. He noticed the tension in Maya's shoulders, the way she kept touching her worn leather wristband, which he later realized was a simple medical alert bracelet for Ethan. He saw her anxiety, the constant low-level stress of someone barely keeping their head above water. The conflict wasn't just external, it was internal. Leonard's internal moral dilemma screamed at him, "Walk away. This is messy. This is a stranger's problem. You don't involve yourself in poverty. You invest in success." The old Leonard, the successful Leonard, advised retreat. But the new, uncomfortable feeling, the sting of her truth, compelled him to stay. When Maya finally packed her bag, Mrs. Alina called her over. Leonard watched the exchange, silent and unseen. "Maya, dear," Mrs. Alina said, her voice strained. "The compressor on the large freezer broke again. The repairman said it's a full replacement, $4000. I don't have it. I need to close until I figure this out. I can't afford to lose the inventory." Maya's face instantly paled, the weariness in her eyes deepening into panic. "Close, Mrs. Alina, but the paycheck. I was counting on the hours next week for Ethan's injection fee." "I know, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm truly heartbroken. I'll call you the moment I can open again. Try to pick up more shifts at the coffee shop." Maya nodded, a defeated slump in her posture that was more painful for Leonard to watch than any market crash. This was the escalating obstacle, the universe compounding her misery. She wasn't just losing her paycheck. The community was losing a lifeline, and her brother was losing a vital necessity. Leonard watched Maya walk toward the door, her dream, her effort, her sacrifice, all suddenly at risk because of a broken refrigerator. He stood up, intending to leave, but his movement caught Mrs. Alina's attention. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" the owner asked, trying to sound professional despite the tears welling up in her eyes. Leonard paused, his hands stuffed deep into his expensive pockets. He could write a check for $4000 without looking away from his phone. It was less than a single morning's transaction fee on a minor deal. It was a moral test that felt insignificant in monetary terms, but monumental in human terms. The old Leonard would have offered to buy the diner, strip the assets, and turn it into a high-end bistro. The new Leonard was struggling to breathe. He walked up to the counter, pulling out his executive black card, the one that felt like a key to the kingdom. "I heard the conversation," he stated simply. "I'm an investor, that's what I do, and I see a good investment here." Mrs. Alina looked at him, bewildered. "Sir, I don't know who you are. I don't need an investor, I need a new freezer." "Exactly," Leonard said, placing the card on the counter. "I will cover the replacement cost of the freezer, and I will advance you 1 month's worth of operating capital, interest-free, non-repayable. Consider it an investment in the people here." Mrs. Alina's hands began to shake. "Sir, that's thousands of dollars. Why?" Leonard hesitated. He couldn't say, "Because your waitress just called me out on my spiritual bankruptcy." "Let's just say," he said, forcing a rare, uncomfortable truth, "that I recently received some excellent, unexpected financial advice. It was about responsibility. Call it a down payment on a new life philosophy." He didn't wait for her reply. He instructed her to contact the best commercial kitchen supplier in the city, paid on the spot, and then, the most difficult part, he asked about Maya. "Tell me, what do you know about that young woman, Maya?" Mrs. Alina, still wiping tears of shock and relief, didn't hold back. She told him about the double shifts, the medical bills for her brilliant brother, her dreams of being a financial planner, and the fact that she was the kindest soul Mrs. Alina had ever known. Leonard listened, the full depth of Maya's sacrifice hitting him. She was sacrificing her future for her present. She was the embodiment of the responsibility he had just been advised to embrace. He left a note for Maya with Mrs. Alina, a simple business card with a single line scribbled on the back. "Your first piece of advice was the most valuable I've received in a decade. I owe you a professional consultation. Call me, L. Drake." He drove away, the black, sleek sedan cutting through the late-night traffic. He felt a weird mix of terror and elation. He had done a good deed. Not a public, PR-driven gesture, but a quiet, anonymous act of kindness. The act itself was small, but the internal shift it signaled was massive. Do you believe kindness is still powerful in today's world? When we feel burnt out and tired, Is it easier to be self-centered or to look outward and help others? Tell us what you think in the comments. Leonard got home to his silent mansion, but his mind wasn't on mergers and acquisitions. It was on a worn diner, a broken freezer, and a determined young woman whose eyes had seen straight through his colossal fortune. His moral test wasn't over. It had only just begun. He knew she would call, and when she did, he needed to be ready to face the full force of her honesty again. The call came 2 days later, late in the afternoon. Leonard was in his office, a palace of glass and steel 50 floors above the city, reviewing merger documents. His assistant, Sarah, a woman who treated every call like a critical national security briefing, buzzed him. "Sir, Amaya Roberts is on the line. She says she has a professional consultation with you." Sarah's tone was hesitant, clearly judging the call to be below the billionaire's attention. "Put her through, Sarah, and hold all other calls." Leonard picked up the phone, a strange, nervous anticipation fluttering in his stomach. He was more nervous than he had been before his first hostile takeover. "Mr. Drake," Maya's voice was formal, but carried the same steady strength he remembered. "Maya, thank you for calling. I appreciate you taking my card seriously." "I'm sorry, sir, but I had to call," she said, a hint of genuine confusion in her voice. "Mrs. Alina told me what you did with the freezer, that you saved her business, and she showed me your card. I don't understand. I gave you a piece of my mind, not a piece of advice. Why would you help?" "You are mistaken, Maya," Leonard replied, leaning back in his chair, suddenly choosing honesty over his usual corporate finesse. "That was the best financial advice I've received. You made me look at my life not through the lens of return on investment, but through the lens of impact. You reminded me that wealth is only truly valuable when it is used to lift people, not just myself." He paused, letting the silence convey the sincerity of his revelation. "Now, you mentioned you wanted to be a financial planner. Is that still the case?" "It's my greatest dream, Mr. Drake. I want to help people avoid the kind of debt traps my family is in, but I had to stop classes to work double shifts for my brother's medical expenses." Her voice cracked, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath her composure. "I need to make about $6,000 for the next quarter's payments and the landlord's past due amount. I don't see a way to do it without 3 jobs." This was the moment, the culmination of the internal conflict. Leonard could write a check, a simple transactional act, and walk away feeling absolved. But that wasn't the kindness she deserved. She deserved the kindness that helped her build her own future. He took a deep breath. This would be unconventional. It would be an act of profound, selfless investment. "Maya, I am not going to give you $6,000. I am going to do something better." The silence on the line was thick with her disappointment. "You're going to be my financial consultant, Maya." I beg your pardon, sir. "I run Drake Investments. We have a world-class financial planning division. I want you to join it immediately as a paid intern and consultant to me, personally. It will pay a starting salary of $75,000 per year, with full benefits and a generous educational stipend to cover your degree completion. Your job will be to offer me your honest, unvarnished opinion on our philanthropic spending and our investment strategy from the perspective of someone who truly understands value." He continued, laying out the terms before she could object. "And, as part of your signing bonus, I will immediately cover the full, outstanding cost of your brother's specialized medical care and medication for the next year, through my private foundation. I want the debt gone, and I want you to be able to focus on your education and your new career." Maya didn't speak. Leonard could hear her ragged breathing, the sound of a young woman's carefully constructed defenses finally collapsing under the weight of unexpected salvation. "Mr. Drake," she finally whispered, her voice choked with emotion, I can't accept that. It's too much. I haven't earned it." You earned it the moment you decided to speak the truth to power, Maya, Leonard countered gently. You earned it with every tired shift you worked for your brother. This isn't charity. This is the most brilliant investment I will make this year. I'm investing in integrity, compassion, and a mind that sees things I no longer can. He gave her the ultimate assurance. If you join my firm, your job will be to remind me, every single day, to be the man who values responsibility over wealth. You are my conscience, Maya, and I am willing to pay a high price for a good conscience. The line was silent for a long minute. Leonard waited, his heart thrumming. He wasn't just offering a job, he was offering a chance at a completely new life, free from the crushing weight of existential debt. Mr. Drake, Maya finally said, the tears in her voice evident but her resolve returning. I accept, and I promise you I will work harder than anyone you've ever hired, but please call me Maya. Welcome aboard, Maya, Leonard said, a genuine, warm smile finally breaking through his hard exterior. For the first time in a decade, the man who had everything felt like he had just gained something truly priceless. He had gained a conscience, a purpose, and a chance at redemption. What was the kindest thing someone ever did for you that changed the trajectory of your life? We'd love to read your experience in the comments. Let's share the stories of human goodness that keep us going. The next 3 months were a dizzying whirlwind of transformation for both Maya and Leonard. For Maya, the change was immediate and profound. The crushing financial anxiety lifted like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The first thing she did was pay off her landlord, a moment of profound, tearful dignity. The second was to call Ethan. She said, standing in her small apartment holding a signed contract from Drake Investments, you don't have to worry about the medicine anymore. I have a job, a real one, full benefits. You are going to get the best care available and I'm going back to school. Ethan, who had grown up watching his sister sacrifice everything, was so overwhelmed he couldn't speak, only weep into the phone. The true reward of Leonard's kindness wasn't the money. It was the return of hope and the possibility of rest for Maya. She was no longer just surviving. She was finally, truly living. She started her new role with the ferocious dedication Leonard expected. She wasn't placed in a corner office. She was given a desk right outside Leonard's. She became his shadow, learning the complexities of high-level finance while concurrently enrolling in an accelerated online degree program in financial planning, fully funded by the firm. Her perspective, the lens of the struggling family, the debt cycle, the value of a single paycheck, was a vital, shocking tonic for Drake Investments. Leonard didn't just listen to her advice, he sought it out. Leonard, she said one day, looking at a proposal for a large real estate development. The numbers look great, but this development forces out 300 low-income tenants with no viable relocation plan. It's a huge ROI, but the impact on the community is devastation. Is that a responsible investment? Leonard stared at the numbers. The old him would have seen only profit. The new him saw the faces of Mrs. Alina, the tired trucker, and his own childhood fear of eviction. You're right, Maya, he admitted, shaking his head. Kill the deal. We will look for a similar project that includes affordable housing units and community investment. Our returns might be lower, but our value will be exponentially higher. The transformation in Leonard was the most striking reward. The hardness around his eyes began to soften. He started leaving the office earlier, not to attend a private club, but to visit Ethan with Maya at the rehabilitation facility, where the young man was receiving intensive physical therapy. Leonard discovered the simple, unadulterated pleasure of human connection. He found himself laughing at Ethan's wry jokes, offering genuine, non-financial advice, and realizing that this was the wealth he had been searching for all along. He even started talking to his own son, David, differently. Instead of talking about market caps, he asked, "How are you using your resources to make things better, David? What is your impact?" David, startled by his father's new humanity, slowly began to respond in kind. Leonard's act of kindness was a ripple that was now transforming his entire family dynamic. The firm noticed the change. Leonard Drake, the Iron Fist of Wall Street, was suddenly focusing on ethical investment, community impact, and responsible capital. It was confusing, but the results were undeniable. The firm's reputation soared, attracting a new wave of ethical, long-term investors who were tired of the old, ruthless greed. One afternoon, Leonard called Maya into his office. He handed her a sealed, personalized envelope. "What is this, Leonard?" she asked, using his first name easily now as a trusted colleague. "This," he said, a look of profound satisfaction on his face, "is the title to the Sunrise Diner. Mrs. Alina was struggling not just with the freezer, but with back taxes and an untenable lease. I bought the building and the business. I have hired an excellent manager to help Mrs. Alina run it, giving her back the stability she deserves. It is now completely debt-free." Maya's eyes filled with fresh tears, this time of pure, radiant joy. "Leonard, that's incredible. And there's a condition," he added, a mischievous glint in his eye. "The diner's ownership is held in a new foundation we are launching, the Maya Roberts Financial Literacy and Community Fund. The profits, after expenses, will be used to fund scholarships for people who want to study financial planning to help low-income families. You will run the foundation. Consider it the final, tangible result of your first piece of advice to me." He was giving her not just a dream, but a platform to make her dream real for hundreds of others. He was giving her legacy. The initial joke, the arrogant condescension, was completely inverted. The billionaire who had sought to demean a waitress had ended up elevating her, and in doing so, had rescued himself from a fate worse than poverty, a life without meaning. "Do you think the world would be different if more people, especially those in positions of power, chose kindness first and profit second? How does one person's act of kindness multiply into a community-wide reward? Join the discussion in the comments." The greatest reward for Leonard wasn't the positive press or the new investors. It was the moment Maya looked at him, not with gratitude, but with the warm, genuine affection of a friend. "Thank you, Leonard," she said, her voice filled with hope. "You finally found your true wealth." Years passed, marked not by market shifts, but by meaningful milestones. Maya Roberts, now a licensed and certified financial planner, stood on the stage of a university auditorium. She was no longer just Leonard's conscience. She was a respected director at Drake Investments, leading their entire socially responsible investment division and running the thriving community fund. Ethan, healthy and in remission, was now pursuing his own degree in engineering, his sister's sacrifice forever etched in his heart. In the front row, Leonard Drake, older but looking lighter, happier, watched her, a gentle paternal pride radiating from him. He had traded his arrogance for humility, his loneliness for deep connection. His wealth was still vast, but its nature had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a shield, it was a powerful tool for good. Maya looked out at the graduating class, a sea of bright, hopeful faces. Her eyes settled on Leonard, and she offered him the same tired, genuine, beautiful smile she had given him that rainy night in the Sunrise Diner years ago. "We all chase wealth," Maya began, her voice calm and strong. "We are taught to accumulate, to protect, to maximize. I chased it, too, desperate to save my family from debt. And then, one rainy night, I met a man who thought he had everything. And I told him he had to stop treating his wealth like a shield and start treating it like a responsibility." She paused, the story hanging in the air. "What I learned, and what I want to share with you, is this. The true measure of a person's wealth is not the size of their portfolio, but the size of their impact. It's not how much you have, but how many lives you have touched. It's not the profit margin, but the people who stand taller because of you." Leonard, listening to her eloquent, heartfelt summation of the change she had wrought in his life, felt a single tear trace a path down his cheek. He had paid for her education, her brother's health, and her future, but she had repaid him tenfold, giving him back his soul. The moral of this story isn't a complex equation or a secret formula. It's a simple, universal truth. A person who sees value in others possesses a form of wealth that no economic downturn can diminish. Kindness is the ultimate investment. It is the only currency that generates a return of pure, unadulterated human connection and meaning. Leonard Drake finally found peace and purpose not on the trading floor, but in the reflection of a simple waitress's courageous honesty. He realized that day that he hadn't stumbled into a common diner. He had walked into his own moral inventory, and the young woman who served him lukewarm coffee had delivered the wake-up call of a lifetime. And in the end, that is the most powerful takeaway of all. Sometimes, the people we look down on are the very ones placed in our path to lift us up. All we have to do is be humble enough to listen. All we have to do is choose kindness.